Welcome to our session on tasty and healthy plant-based burgers. You may be interested in this session because you really like plant-based burgers already, and if that's the case, maybe we've got some different recipes for you to try. Maybe you have a family member or people who are coming to a barbecue for the 4th of July who don't eat meat, or maybe you are looking to improve your heart health. There are a lot of reasons to potentially try plant-based burgers, and we're going to talk about their economical and their health benefits and share a few recipes here today. There are a lot of options for different kinds of plant-based burgers. You can buy some ready-made in the store. What we're going to do today is talk mostly about burgers that you make yourself from scratch from different kinds of beans, whether you cook them yourself or use canned beans. But obviously there are plenty of other recipes out there as well that you can try if you would like to buy them in the store, or if you want to try recipes that don't necessarily call specifically for beans but call for a lot of plants like vegetables in them. They're all healthy. It's a matter of what you like and what your favorite flavors are. So hopefully there are some things here that might be intriguing for you. Beans by themselves are fairly bland in flavor, but the burgers that we're going to talk about will definitely spice things up. There are a number of ways that you can do that. You can add fresh ingredients like onion, garlic, herbs, peppers to your burgers. You can obviously do that to your meat burgers as well to give them flavor. Another option is to add some dry seasonings to the burgers to give them flavor. Chili powder, for example, or curry powder. Any spice blend that you like will work. And if you find that a burger still doesn't quite have as much flavor as you'd like, there are plenty of condiment options too. Some might already be in your fridge. Others we can give you some recipes for in this session. One thing about bean burgers is that they are definitely cheaper than meat. As we've seen recently with the pandemic, the cost of meat can fluctuate greatly, and it can get pretty expensive to feed even a family of 4 if you're trying to eat beef burgers, which are most common here in this country. So bean burgers can be another option, even if you have people in your family who maybe eat more than one burger at a sitting. Having some bean burgers and some meat burgers as options, they can have one of each and still feel full and satisfied, and you've already reduced the cost of your meal. So money is one reason to think about trying bean burgers. The cost of beans may fluctuate, but not nearly as much. And even if as meat, and even if it does fluctuate, they're still going to be cheaper. And the other thing to think about is that a recent book called How Not to Diet talks about some studies that have been done where people have eaten meat burgers and plant-based burgers that are high in fiber. And the people who ate plant-based burgers were satisfied longer, not just during that meal, but even beyond that meal. They were making smarter choices and they were reducing their portion sizes. So if eating plant-based high-fiber burgers like the ones we're making today can help you feel full sooner and longer, they can also help to just reduce the amount of food you eat, which can be both healthy and good for your budget. Bean burgers are definitely a good choice if you're looking to improve the health of your diet. They are a significant source of fiber, and they are low in fats, especially saturated fats. They also have other important nutrients in them, like iron and folate. Plants are good in general for getting the essential nutrients every day. Meat also has important nutrients like protein and iron and B12, but you can get those things in other ways a lot of times, and even if you're just reducing the amount of meat that you're eating, bean burgers can be a healthy option to have as a replacement at times. This table gives you a comparison of both cost and nutritional value of different kinds of meat burgers versus bean burgers and the Beyond Meat burgers, which are the brand that's easily available in this area in the grocery stores as a meat substitute that people say tastes a lot like ground beef. A couple of things to note in general, bean burgers, and in particular the chili bean burger recipe that we're going to make together today, is higher in certain nutrients and lower in some of the bad things like saturated fat. There is a high amount of sodium in this burger, but it should be noted that this is based on using a can of beans that has some salt added. If you either bought a low sodium or no sodium can of beans, or if you cooked your own beans without salt or just a dash of salt, you're going to reduce the sodium greatly. I calculated the difference based on cooking my own beans, and the amount of sodium in one of these burgers would only be 20 milligrams, so it's lower than any of the meat burgers that are listed here. So both cost and nutrition could be reasons you might think about making these kinds of burgers, and maybe some people in your family, maybe you included, are also interested in the environment. Obviously, we know now that the beef industry in particular can be especially harmful for the environment, so ecology can be another reason you might be thinking about trying these burgers. So we're going to make a burger here today if you'd like to follow along. This is a recipe that I've tried and really like, and anybody who likes chili and chili powder as a flavor will probably like this kind of burger because of the chili powder that's the primary flavor ingredient in it. If you would like to make this burger along with us, then I would recommend that you get your ingredients together. You're going to need 2 cups of cooked beans, either cooked yourself and rinsed and drained, or you can use a 15-ounce can of beans. Any beans that you like for your chili would work. I often like a tri-bean blend, which is kidney, black beans, and pinto beans. Because that's what I put in my chili. Today I'm going to use just a can of black beans because the last time I made these burgers I did it with the 3-bean blend. So I'm just going to do a black bean chili burger today. You'll need an egg that's beaten. If you want to make this an entirely plant-based burger, then you can mix a tablespoon of flax meal if you have it and 3 tablespoons of water. Mix it together and refrigerate it for 15 minutes so that it can thicken. Or if you have an egg substitute that you prefer to use, that would be fine as well. Some garlic would be good, 1 to 2 cloves depending on size and how much you like. You could add some onion if you wanted to mince or chop up a bit of onion, that would be fine as well, even though the recipe doesn't call for it. You'll want some chili powder and half a teaspoon of oregano. If you have it, Mexican oregano would be great, but Italian oregano is perfectly fine too. There's not much difference. And a tablespoon of tomato paste, a little bit of hot sauce to taste, depending on what you like. You could leave it out if your family doesn't really like spicy burgers, but a little bit of hot sauce doesn't make it super hot. And you'll need a half a cup of flour. This recipe calls for oat flour. If you don't have oat flour, and you have whole oats, you can make your own oat flour by processing it in a food processor or seed and nut grinder. If your food processor will grind up beans and seeds, then it would do perfectly fine to make your oat flour. You just basically measure out about a cup of, or half a cup of whole old-fashioned oats, and process it until it's a powder. About a half a cup of whole oats makes just a little more than a half a cup of oat flour, and you might even find you need just a little bit more. We'll talk about that when we make the recipe. If you don't have oat flour, or you don't have the option for making oat flour, you can also use any kind of flour. Oat flour is a relatively fine flour, so depending on what kind of flour you're using, all-purpose flour, for example, tends to be thick and to cake. I would recommend that you sift it first, but if you have a nice fine flour that you can use, you could just go ahead and measure it out. I can show you what the oat flour looks like so you can see how fine it is. So this is the oat flour. As you can see, it's got more of a consistency of corn flour than of all-purpose flour. So if you have a flour that is thicker, I would recommend that you go ahead and sift it to make it a bit finer. One last thing about the oat flour is that if you make it yourself and you have some extra left over, you can always store it in a sealed container, a Ziploc bag or another container. Just store it in the dark like you do any other kind of flour, a cool, dark, dry place like your cupboard, or you can put it in the refrigerator. Just make sure that it's well sealed because there can be moisture in the fridge or the freezer, and you do want it to stay in a dry environment. Away from the dark is away from the light is more important. Than it can get warm sometimes in the kitchen, but room temperature is fine. You just don't want it to be super hot. So you could go ahead and make your own oat flour and store extra if you want, or just use whatever flour you prefer. Now we're going to start making these burgers, and in order to do that, you'll want to get all those ingredients together. So pause the video if you need to get everything together, you might want to go ahead too and mash your beans up. I will show you what they look like. You can put them in a food processor if you'd like, or you can mash them by hand. I like to mash mine by hand with an old-fashioned potato masher because I don't like my bean burgers to be too uniform. I prefer that the beans stay chunky. You do want to get them mashed because the inside of the bean is sticky and helps to hold the burger together. But you don't necessarily have to puree it so that it's a uniform mixture. You can basically process it or mash it to your preferred consistency. So I will show you what mine looks like mashed by hand. Hopefully you can see here that those beans are still relatively chunky. They've been mashed so that the insides are exposed to help to make the mixture stick together, but I have not made them a very uniform mixture at this point. So go ahead and mash your beans. Once you've done that, you can resume the video and we will go on to the next step, which is to mix together a beaten egg, some minced garlic, maybe some chopped or minced onion if you'd like, probably a 1/4 cup or so would be good, and then your tablespoon of chili powder, oregano, tomato paste, and if you want, add some hot sauce. And go ahead and stir all of those things together in a bowl once you've beaten your egg, and you should get a nice thick paste. So this is what my egg, tomato paste, and spice mixture looks like. You can see that it's fairly thick and stays on the spoon. This is going to do nicely holding the burgers together for us, and it's also going to give it some really great flavor. Once you have your egg, tomato paste, and spices mixed together into that nice thick paste, you can go ahead and stir it in with the beans. Stir it well so that everything mixes together well. You should end up with a mixture that is like a very thick chili stew, not like a brothy chili, but a very thick chili stew. Even thicker maybe than if you make a chili that has broth in it and diced tomatoes. Sometimes chilies can get fairly thick, but they're a little bit watery. This really shouldn't be watery at all if you've let your beans drain, because the most liquid the ingredient in this is the hot sauce, and there's not a whole lot of that. I can show you what mine looks like. So here you can see that this is even thicker now than the paste was, because the insides of the beans as well as the chunks of beans have mixed together with that paste to make a really nice thick mixture. Now that you have your paste mixture stirred in with your beans, you can go ahead and add your flour. Just add that 1/2 cup for now and stir everything together well so that things mix up. You're going to have a mixture that is going to be somewhat sticky because of the insides of the beans and the paste mixture. The oat flour is going to help to hold things together and bind everything. What you want to get is a mixture that is not too crumbly. You don't want to be forming your patties and find that it's falling apart, either because it's still too soft and liquidy, or because you've added too much flour and now it's becoming kind of crumbly. Either way, that's not going to make a great burger. If it's falling apart when you are forming them, it's going to fall apart when you cook them. So you do want them to hold together well, even at room temperature. I also recommend that you refrigerate them for at least 60 minutes to help to chill them before you cook them, because that helps to hold them together in the cooking process too. But if your burger is falling apart because it's too dry and crumbly, or because it's just too liquidy to start, you're going to want to add some ingredients. If this mixture is probably, if anything, going to be a bit too moist, so just add a little bit of flour at a time to it, maybe a teaspoon or so at a time, and stir it in until you can shape your patties and they'll hold together for you without falling apart. If you find that it is too dry, either because you've added too much flour to compensate, or you're using a different recipe, often recipes that don't call for any egg have more of a tendency to be dry and crumbly. In those kinds of cases, find the liquid ingredients in the recipe and add a little bit more of that at a time. In this case, if you are making your own flax eggs or using an egg substitute, you could add a little bit more egg, but more likely what you'll want to do is just add a little bit more tomato paste, and maybe just a little more hot sauce if you like the spiciness in your chili burgers. So whatever recipe you're using, if it's too dry and crumbly, find the liquids and add what you can. Another option, there's no oil in this recipe, but you could add just a little bit of olive oil or other vegetable oil that you prefer to use, just a little bit at a time. Drizzle a little oil in it, mix it together, and see how it holds. It's a little harder when the burger is dry and crumbly because you have to find those liquids. Oil is a decent option, especially if it's olive oil or other plant-based oil. But some recipes have other liquids, as we'll see later. I will show you what my recipe looks like now that I am ready to shape my burgers. This is what the burgers look like. As you can see, the patties are holding together nicely, even though they're at room temperature. The recipe is definitely just a little bit sticky. You'll find that just a little bit of it will stick to your hands, but the beans themselves should hold in the mixture. You shouldn't find that the beans are falling out and the mixture is falling apart as you shape them. If that's the case, definitely add more flour. But also notice I do have one stray piece of bean here that I missed when I was scraping the bowl, but otherwise they also are not crumbly. They're actually a very moist recipe. So once you have those patties formed, I do recommend that you refrigerate them for an hour. Just let them chill. They will fare better when you cook them. You have options for how you cook them, however you prefer to cook your burgers in general. You can pan fry them on medium for about 7 to 8 minutes on each side. You can grill them for about the same amount of time on a charcoal or fire grill, or you can do what I usually do, and that is to bake them. I usually put mine on parchment paper because the sheet that I use doesn't have any kind of nonstick coating on it, but if you have a nonstick baking sheet, that would be fine as well. You don't necessarily need parchment paper in that case. I like to bake them at 375. Some recipes will tell you 350. That's fine as well. I find that at 375, they get just a little bit brown on the outside, and they're nicely cooked. But 350 would work as well. Usually if you cook them at 350, you do them just a little bit longer, maybe 25 minutes. And then you can serve them whatever you like on your burgers, whatever you like with your chili. Sour cream is nice. Hot sauce if people like spicy foods. Whatever you prefer with your chili or with your burgers will work. And I have a recipe here for what I call a zesty sour cream. If you have sour cream and hot sauce, you can just mix a half a cup of sour cream with a half a teaspoon of hot sauce and stir them together. And you can put those on your burgers. If you don't like hot sauce, you can always just do plain sour cream. Guacamole is good too, so salsa. You have a lot of options. It's a really flavorful burger. I hope if you try making it that you like it. We're not going to make any other burgers, but I do want to give you a few other recipes and just talk about a couple of other things briefly. So this is a black bean salsa burger. In this case, the salsa really gives the burger the flavor. So if you like salsa, this is a nice option. This is also a fully plant-based burger. There's no egg in this, no dairy of any kind. And the recipe is relatively similar to the chili recipe, other than you don't have the egg. And the seasoning is just a little bit different. Couple of things to think about with this recipe. One is that you want to make sure your salsa is not watery. If it's a relatively watery salsa, you can even go ahead and drain it and maybe press some of the water out. Too much water and you're going to find you're going to need to add a lot of flour to your recipe to hold it together. And the other thing to think about is that because this is a fully plant-based recipe, I do find this one tends to be a little bit more crumbly than the chili recipe is. So don't hesitate to add a little bit more salsa or even just drizzle a little extra olive oil to help to hold it together if that's the case. My experience is that I've had to add a little bit of liquid to this recipe rather than with the chili burger recipe. Sometimes I have to add maybe an extra teaspoon of flour to hold it together properly. Otherwise, this recipe cooks fairly similarly, and the same tips as usual. Refrigerate it for about 60 minutes. If this recipe is not quite spicy enough for you, not enough flavor, you can add more salsa, you can add some guacamole, you can add some sour cream or that zesty sour cream recipe. I like this burger instead of meat in my Tex-Mex dishes. So my tacos, my burritos, my quesadillas, you can actually crumble it up if you want to. It serves well as a full burger on a roll or in a wrap, but you can also crumble it up like you would a ground beef type of recipe if you wanted to do that and use it either instead of or in addition to some meat in your tacos and your burritos. Another really tasty burger is a barbecue black bean burger. I have one here for you. There are other options around. This one also calls for eggs, so it's not fully plant-based, but if you wanted it to be plant-based, you could do that egg substitution again. In this case, this is usually a fairly moist recipe, and you can obviously add a little bit more barbecue sauce if you need to, if it's not quite moist enough, or you can add some more olive oil, or you might find that you need to add just a little bit more flour to it. A couple of other things to note. I know somebody who has made this recipe and said that it turned out to be a bit too dry and that the next time she was planning to maybe not dry the beans out quite so much. You could actually skip the part of putting the beans in the oven ahead of time and just drain them and maybe pat them dry. Most of these burger recipes don't call for you to put the beans in the oven. What that will do is make the beans a little bit crispy, which might be nice if you like a crunch to your burger, but it can also potentially make the burgers drier, so you'll want to be careful about that. Otherwise, these cook similarly to the other burgers, and you can serve it with some more barbecue sauce if you'd like. The sour cream would work as well. Anything that you like on a barbecue burger would work with these barbecue black bean burgers. One last recipe here is the falafel burger. This one I'm sharing because it does not use black beans. This one is similar to the other recipes because this one also does not call for any egg. The same caution goes with this burger as with the salsa burger. You might find, you can see that even this, after I added some liquid, it was still just a little bit crumbly, but it was holding together well for me for the most part. What was falling out for me in this case was the flour. But the beans stuck, as did the cilantro and the other whole ingredients. This recipe is nice if you like falafel. You can make them regular sized and eat them as a burger with whatever you like with your falafel. I have a recipe to share on the next screens for tzatziki sauce and also one for a cilantro sauce. If you don't like cilantro, you can use parsley instead. It's a matter of what you prefer. Both will work well. And in this case, if you don't like very spicy things, you could reduce the turmeric and the cumin. Those two spices have relatively strong flavors to them. The paprika and the coriander less so. So if you're concerned because you have people in your family who don't like super spicy things, this is not a very spicy burger, but the cumin and the turmeric do give it a bit of a stronger flavor than some people are used to. So you could reduce those, maybe cut them in half, and you would still have a nice flavor to it. Otherwise, this recipe cooks similarly. Again, since it's a plant-based recipe, be prepared potentially to add a little bit more of the a little bit more liquid. In this case, there's not much in the recipe itself you can choose from, so I would recommend just drizzling a little bit of olive oil until it sticks together for you. On this page, I have some recipes for you that I mentioned, the cilantro yogurt sauce and the tzatziki sauce. If you're interested in something different to make to put on top of these, if either of those look like they have some interesting flavors that you would like, you're welcome to go ahead and try them. The picture I have here is just of a falafel burger with that zesty sour cream sauce that I mentioned earlier. So those are our recipes. There are so many out there. There are books you can borrow from the library. There are recipes you can find online. Think about what kinds of flavors you like and go ahead and look for burgers that allow you to either put those flavors in the burger themselves or that might complement the kinds of condiments that you like. Anything will work. You can use any kind of beans, whatever you prefer. If you don't care for black beans as much, even in these recipes, you could substitute a different kind of bean, red or white kidney beans, northern beans, pinto beans, all of them will work well. Just make sure that you mash them. And then, as I said, if the recipe is too moist that it's falling apart or too crumbly that it's falling apart, add just a little bit of liquid or a little bit of flour to compensate, just a little bit at a time until they hold together for you without those beans and other solid ingredients falling out of the patties. Refrigerate them for about 60 minutes before cooking. That will help to ensure that they stay together when you cook. And just have fun with it. You can substitute them instead of meat in different recipes, or you can just have them as something totally different to reduce the amount of meat that you're eating, or to give vegetarians an option of something to eat when you have a meal that has other kinds of burgers made from meat. And one last thing that I might say that's not on this slide: if you end up with extra beans that you don't need, if it's just a little bit, you can always add them to the recipe. A little bit more won't make a difference, maybe a half a cup or so. You probably don't want a whole cup extra of beans without increasing the other ingredients, but up to a half a cup is okay if you've cooked too many beans. Another option, you can actually freeze beans. Just make sure that they are dried well, and that you put them in a freezer safe container, a Ziploc bag or other sealed container, and they will freeze just fine. And you can get them out to use the next time you make burgers or when you make a soup or other recipe that calls for beans. I hope that there is something that you've found here that will work for you, and I hope that you enjoy these recipes. Thanks for having an interest.